Hello, class. Thank you for being so willing to figure out a way that we could still go through today's content even though we had to cancel class. I definitely would prefer doing this in person because I had a couple fun activities planned, but I will just explain the activities and the main points that I was hoping the class would have gotten from those activities. So, in our previous lecture, we talked about teams and I provided a little bit of an overview. Some of the things that we discussed were the benefits that teams can bring to organizations. So, again, as just a brief recap, more creativity, better customer service, and higher motivation. We talked about some of the stages for development, and we'll talk more about the norming stage in today's lecture. Talked about times of managing teams, different factors like cohesion, social loafing, and collective efficacy. We talked about levels of interdependence, how a leader can play a role in a team, and some of the ways that you might consider designing teams, like defining the tasks, the knowledge, skills, abilities, deciding if creativity is important, and simply how many people should be on the team, which, as we said in class, really could be determined by the amount of resources you have. But in today's lecture, we are going to talk about team norms, psychological safety, mission statements, and team building activities using Myers-Briggs. Let's begin with team norms. As I said earlier, in the 5 stages of team development, the norming stage is very crucial. The faster we can get into the norming stage, the sooner we can get to performing. And establishing the right kind of norms really serves as a recipe to the performance of your team. Now, when I'm saying norms, I mean shared expectations about how things operate within a group or a team. This is actually a screenshot of a document I put together for an organization. So this client we had worked all across California. We can kind of say they had different departments and various people all across the state. Although they didn't call it departments, that's what I will say for the sake of simplicity. So they really didn't have much team norms or mission statements or standard processes. Everything was very confusing to people within the company, but they were expected to work with one another despite the difference. So we ended up creating some documents for them to help guide them as a team and establish norms before beginning a project. And this is a little screenshot of part of that form. So generally, when you ask people to think of norms, you might have a topic that's just general norms. So things like, what does this working relationship look like? I added a few to help get people started, but then they're expected to add their own bullets and type the form. Again, they worked digitally across California, so all of this was a fillable PDF or they were in Word documents. Some of the examples of a more general norm were things like we will treat each other with respect, we will be on time to meetings, but we left them space to add some of their own norms. It's also important to think about communication. So what is the best mode of communication and what's the expected response time? Some people prefer email, some people prefer a phone call. Some companies use things like Slack or Teams. So, what is the best mode of communication? It's also important to think about how quickly are you expecting me to respond. Some people get really frustrated if someone doesn't respond to an email within the next hour. Some people think, oh, as long as I do it within 48 hours, I've been responsible. So you can see how these differences of expectations for response times could be really difficult for people in a company. Could lead to communication problems. So again, we're first forming a team, about to start a project together. Let's just talk about this from the beginning. Another topic to consider is something like action items. So after a team meeting, for example, how will you decide on the action items? How will you share those action items with the team? And how will you update one another? Some people think that, oh, I'll send out a recap email at the end of the meeting that kind of summarizes what happened and who's in charge of what before the next meeting. And we'll provide updates when we meet again. So it could be as simple as that. But again, some people could perceive someone sending out a recap email with the action items as offensive. Oh, you don't think I know what action items I signed up to do? How dare you send out an email reminding me of what I should be working on? Again, they probably weren't trying to be condescending or controlling. They really thought the recap email with action items was helpful. So let's just talk about these expectations at the beginning of forming a team. Another topic could be accountability. So, what happens if someone doesn't fulfill their aspects of the project? Something like social loafing, perhaps, is what we're getting at here. So, some people might say, we agree to go to that person and ask what's happening. Now, perhaps there was a family emergency that we're unaware of, and that's why they didn't submit something on time. So, first, coming from a perspective of understanding and hoping everything's okay. And then hearing from the person why it is that they haven't been completing their work. And then another topic that's important to consider is conflict resolution. So, if conflict were to occur in a group of people, how will it be handled? Last class, we talked about there are different conflict styles. So, some people who are avoidant may not ever want to bring it up to the group, whereas some people who might be a little bit more cooperative, for example, want to openly discuss as an entire team. Again, we just need to come together as a group of people and set some norms about how we will handle that conflict if it occurs. I had mentioned this in class, and there isn't a group project associated with this class, but if there was, I probably would have printed out some forms similar to this one and asked all of you to get into your groups and answer these questions before leaving class. So this is a helpful tool, I think, for any type of working team. Another topic that we are going to discuss today is how to foster psychological safety. Now, this was part of the required reading for this week. I won't go into detail of everything covered, especially the how to develop. There were several more listed, and I've added a couple of my own on this slide. But please know that about how to develop psychological safety from the article. According to this article, psychological safety is the belief that you will not be punished when you make a mistake. So here we think that a group of people have a type of group. They have a type of group in which someone can come and say, I've made a mistake. Here's what I've learned. People might actually jump in with their thoughts on it or what they could have done in the future to help it. And it actually could lead to more creativity. So having the ability to come and say, I've made a mistake, I need help, or I've made a mistake and here's how I plan on fixing it, could actually be really helpful for several members on the team. Some positive outcomes associated with psychological safety are things like higher creativity, higher cohesion, and the prevention of groupthink. So if we think about an environment in which you can learn from your mistakes, we can now see that this really aligns with the rapid prototyping idea, kind of what we discussed in the Marshmallow Tower Challenge, in which someone is constantly trying things. It's an iterative process, and by learning from a mistake, they can actually make a better product. In an environment in which mistakes are accepted and learning from failure is accepted, we would expect there to be more support from one another and therefore higher cohesion. Interestingly, some research says that when we have higher cohesion, the downside of that could be that we have a lot of groupthink. Now, groupthink occurs when people in a team setting are afraid to speak their minds or go against the status quo. One, because they don't want to disrupt cohesion, or two, if everyone else is saying that that's what they should do, then they're afraid to have a dissenting opinion. Perhaps because they're worried that people will think they sound stupid for saying something like that. So, again, the positive side of psychological safety is we have higher cohesion without the fear of groupthink. Now, the article spent quite a bit of time discussing how to develop psychological safety. I've added a couple of my own here and a couple of what the article said. So, again, please refer back to the article on psychological safety. One of the things that you can do to develop psychological safety is to discuss this during the norming stage. So, you might ask people, what will happen if someone makes a mistake? What if someone comes to us with a dissenting point of view? I've often heard of people creating a devil's advocate rule. So, this is where someone can prevent groupthink by disagreeing with what's happening in the group, as long as they start with something like, just to play devil's advocate, and they present a dissenting viewpoint. Again, playing devil's advocate helps us focus on the task and an alternative point of view or perspective. And it doesn't usually come off relational or we're attacking the person. We're just presenting an idea that's different than the ideas already said within the group. So, again, if you want to develop psychological safety, some sort of norm like playing devil's advocate is celebrated within a team. Another way to develop psychological safety is to approach conflict as collaboration. So again, this is much easier to do if we think that the conflict is focused on the task rather than person. In fact, last week we talked about task conflict actually being really beneficial in helping creativity and innovation within a group. It's also important to openly listen to ideas. Now, this sounds very simple and obvious, but sometimes when working with a group, it can be difficult to hear from everybody. And we'll usually find that within a team, there might be one or two people that tend to dominate conversation and a few people who tend to be more quiet within the team. So making sure that we're trying to hear from everybody and that when people do speak up, that we are open to what they have to say. Don't jump to a conclusion or right away tell them why their idea isn't going to work is very key to developing psych safety. And one of my favorites discussed in the article is to measure psychological safety. So, how are we going to gauge the current level of psych safety within a team? Earlier this week, I discussed that when in a team, it's important to kind of have check-in periods. How are things going within our group? Could we work on anything? Specifically, it's best to do this during times of stability. So during these team check-ins, we might want to ask ourselves, does everyone feel comfortable speaking their minds or coming to the team if they're experiencing hardships or challenges? Have we been too harsh on someone in the past that might have made a mistake? Larger companies and leaders might actually send out formal surveys to gauge psychological safety, and that's how they choose to measure it. But I think measuring psych safety through conversations can also be very useful for teams. The third topic I want to discuss today is how to establish a mission statement. So, I'm quoting here, a good mission statement should answer, what does your company do? How does your company do it? Why does your company do it? And who does it serve? A mission statement is really important, and actually I think that I used to just glance over these and not really think much of them. But a mission statement is a way to bring a group of people together for a common purpose. If we think back to the definition of a group versus a team, having a goal or a common purpose is what distinguishes a team from a group of people. Therefore, it's expected that providing a team with a mission or a purpose is what's going to help keep them motivated and bring them to work together. So it can actually be very crucial. It also helps the leader understand what it is they're hoping the team to accomplish. Now, the examples I'm going to show are actually mission statements for an entire company, not a specific smaller team of people. But I just want to show you some of these mission statements. And if we were in class, I would have had you try to guess which company. And then we would talk about ways that the mission statement is answering these questions or failing to answer these questions. Interestingly, most mission statements fail to answer all four of these questions. So let's go through a couple of those examples. The first one I have is to bring inspiration and innovation to every athlete in the world. If you have a body, you are an athlete. So here's where I would have asked the class, what companies do we think this could be? Name some. And perhaps your guesses would have been things like Big Five or Dick's Sporting Goods, or maybe some of you would have thought of specific athletic teams, but the answer is actually Nike. So if we think about those four questions earlier of what does your company do, how does your company do it, why does your company do it, and who does it serve? We can read this again and notice that it's not answering all four questions. It kind of answers the why, to bring inspiration and innovation to every athlete, and the who, every athlete, and then they tell us that if you have a body, you are an athlete. But it doesn't really tell us what they do or how they do it. So again, they're not answering all four questions. What about the next one? The objective is to be one of the world's leading producers and providers of entertainment and information, using its portfolio of brands to differentiate its content, services, and consumer products. I really wish I could hear some of your guesses for this mission statement. Maybe you would have thought something having to do with movies or something having to do with the theater, perhaps. And I think you'd be surprised to realize that this is Disney. So as far as what does your company do, well, it says provider of entertainment and information. It doesn't tell us specifically what kind of entertainment. How does your company do it? It uses a portfolio of brands to differentiate its content, services, and consumer products. Again, that appears to be very vague. Who does it serve? Says, well, actually, it just says and consumer products, so we're not really sure who their audience is. And then why? So it says the world's leading. Again, I don't think that they're fully answering any of these four questions quite as well as they could. How about this one? We promise our customers stellar service, our suppliers a valuable partner, our investors the prospect of sustained profitable growth, and our employees the allure of huge impact. I think that if I would have read this out loud to the class and asked who this was, I was expecting a whole bunch of laughter, because I think this mission statement could apply to almost any company in the world. We really don't know what they do. We know that they're promising customer service, suppliers valuable partner, sustainable growth. We don't know why they're doing this, I guess for profitability. We don't know how, and we don't know who their consumers actually are. Who's their audience here? So your guesses for this could have varied so much, but it's Netflix. And I think that's very surprising. I would have expected something having to do with entertainment here, and that's what we happen to see in Disney. All right, and the last one we have is the mission is to live in this world where one day you can feel like you're home anywhere, and not in a home, but truly home, where you belong. To live in this world where you can be home, you have to provide hospitality, and hosts provide hospitality. So perhaps some of your guesses might have been something like hotels. Maybe you would have thought having to do with some sort of travel sites. And maybe some of you would have guessed Airbnb. I think that this one doesn't do too bad. I would say that it's a little long-winded and hard to follow, but they do tell us what their company does. They provide a home away from home. They say why, because they want everyone to feel like they're home anywhere. Who does it serve? It serves people traveling, and it's up to the host to provide hospitality. The what is a little bit more challenging to understand. If you're familiar with Airbnb, that probably became obvious very quickly, but it's about a shared resource of living accommodations. So again, not the best example, but it somewhat touches on all four. I now want to share with you an actual activity we did with that same company that was all across California. So, like I mentioned, they were all across California, and it was really difficult for them to band together as a team. And we realized that when we asked people, why, what are they doing? What's the work they're doing? People had a hard time answering that question. They didn't really know what they were doing, why they were doing it, how they were doing it, and who they were truly trying to serve. They needed a mission statement. So we ended up holding a 2-day event in Sacramento where we asked everyone to come to this conference or this 2-day event. And we ended up getting over 100 people in the room. And for part of the 2 days, we helped them establish a mission statement. So this is actually a screenshot of part of the activity they were given. So we came up with some examples for a nonprofit that focuses on providing clean water to underrepresented communities and third world countries. So I'm going to walk through this example and then I'll explain a little bit more about the outcomes for this specific client. So in this example, we kind of told them, these are the basics of a mission statement. Here are some times when mission statements don't work. So kind of what we just did together. And then we ran them through this activity. They were given large butcher pieces of paper, similar to this, although the words here were blank, so they had places to write. But this is what was provided to them, this left column over here. We explained the activity, and then they worked in smaller teams of people at their tables and filled out this chart. So we explained to them that for the sake of an example, here's a nonprofit, this is what they do. So as far as their cause, the who, what, where, they tend to serve families, women, children, farmers, fishermen, developing areas, rural communities, in places like Liberia and Bangladesh. What they do specifically is provide access to clean water, safe routes to water, filters, sanitation, education on healthy water. And they believe that their impact is to provide less thirst, less sickness. Kids can go to school, can pursue their dreams, save time and energy, healthier lifestyles. So this is the example we provided them. We gave them about 20 minutes to work in their teams and come up with some words or phrases to answer what is their cause, how do they do it, and what is the impact they actually make. After giving them time to do that, we had them put it into an actual skeleton of what could become a sentence. So going off this nonprofit example, their cause is developing areas, families, communities, local economies. Their actions are to provide clean water, sanitation, education. Their impact is stronger communities, security, health, and opportunity. So taking essentially this chart, starting to form it into a skeleton, then set people up to come up with draft mission statements. So based off of this, some potential draft mission statements for this organization could be, we help families in developing areas stay healthy by providing clean water and education. Helping build safe, strong communities in the developing world through safe drinking water. Through clean water, we promote security and opportunities in rural economies. So from here, a group of people could take some of these draft statements, refine them as best they can, choose one of them, and that becomes the mission of the organization. So what we ended up doing for this specific client is after they had time to build out their charts like this, and then come up with a draft mission statement, we asked them to hang them all around the room. There were about 14 different groups, so 14 draft statements and 14 charts all around the room with 100 plus people in this room. We gave them all little sticky notes and asked each of them, I think, got 5. And we asked, actually maybe they got 10. But we asked them to walk around the room and put a little sticky dot on the ones they thought were their favorites. they were told that we would take some of the top of the stickies or of the draft statements, work with a smaller group of people within the organization to refine and finish the statement. And here's a couple pictures. So we can see that, for example, over here, they said their cause is businesses, students, regions. Their actions are to teach skills, student success, help colleges, businesses, industries. Their impact is to save lives, build strong communities. And the mission statement they ended up putting together serves as a catalyst to support pathways that create opportunities for California's students, businesses, and industries. And here we can see all of those little dots that people voted on. And they also had post-it notes where they could comment on edits or suggestions. Another one is they said their cause are educators, California taxpayers, students. Their action is to identify employers, empower needs, connecting partners. Their impact is completion rates for students, savings for colleges, increased living wages for careers. And the mission statement they ended up coming up with is to support student success from enrollment to employment. We can see that this one received several sticky dots and also sticky notes with some potential edits. What ended up happening here is we took the top 5 and built a strong force, a strong group of people to come together and put all of these as best we could together, make edits, and then we sent it out in a company-wide survey, some of the top options, and had people vote on their favorite mission statement. So this is a real client example of how team building can be done regardless if the people work in a 100+ organization or in a team of 5 people. Now I want to talk a little bit about team building activities, and I think one that often gets talked about is trust falls. Here I would have been interested to hear from you how many of you have participated in trust falls as part of team building activities. Interestingly, a lot of people have. I would have also been interested to hear from you whether or not you thought it was effective. So what are some of the pros and cons associated with trust falls? I think for the most part, it's just kind of a fun, silly activity. But I think a pro is that it creates a shared experience. So some companies will do this when they're bringing on a group of people to begin. So it's called onboarding in a company. So you might have a group of people about to start working for this company and you want to have them get to know each other and the company culture. So you might do some fun trust falls. Sounds silly, doesn't really relate to the job. Does it really in fact increase trust? There's mixed results. But what I think it does do is that when you're walking around the office and you happen to see Frank, who was in your onboarding group, you say, hey, you were one of the people in my trust fall. It's something memorable. It creates a shared experience for a group of people. And for that reason, I think trust falls can be kind of fun. But to be honest, the evidence of team building and helping foster trust kind of stops there. Some cons is that it's extremely hard to transfer to the job. How does me falling off something and people catching me transfer to the work I do? Now, if you're actually a firefighter or something like that, well, then that might be very relevant to what you do. But for those who are knowledge workers, it's very unlikely. It could actually negatively impact individuals. So individuals who might be concerned about their weight or might have a physical disability, it's going to be extremely hard for them to participate in this, and that could actually put them out of the group's shared experience. So it could have harmful effects. But one type of team building activity is based off the Myers-Briggs has been supported. We've talked a lot about personality and how Myers-Briggs is not an effective tool for hiring, like selection, but it can be really helpful for understanding teams and helping build teams. So here in class, this is where I would have actually done this activity. Traditionally, this activity is a 3-hour long activity, and we would have briefly gone through each of these just so you can get a little bit of an understanding. As a recap, Myers-Briggs goes into extroverts versus introverts, sensors versus intuitives, thinkers versus feelers, and judgers versus perceivers. And there's one activity for each of these main categories. So if we were in class, I would have had everyone put everything away. We would have moved all the desks to the side of the room, and everyone would have stood in the very center of the room. I would have said something like, if you are an extrovert, go to the right side of the room. If you are an introvert, go to the left side of the room. And as a collective, we could have observed how many people went to the right and how many people went to the left. And what would have likely happened is we would have had about 50-50. It's very likely that we would have had half extroverts, half introverts. And then we would have ran through an actual activity. First, I would have given a brief overview of extroverts versus introverts. I might have said something like, extroverts tend to focus on energy and gain energy from external sources. So they tend to do their best thinking when they're processing in a communal or collaborative way. We tend to call these people the social butterflies of the office. And when they're assigned to a group project, they try to keep the mood very lively and interactive. I then would have probably asked the right side of the room, do you agree with these statements? Does this describe you? Most likely would have gotten some nods. Then I would have described the introverts, who might not speak as much as an extrovert. They prefer to think about what they want to say and fully form their thoughts before they're ready to say it. To get their input, sometimes you have to ask them directly, or sometimes they prefer to actually communicate via email where they've had time to calculate their response. It's important to give introverts time to speak without interrupting them. And now, as far as the activity, I would have asked the people on the right side of the room, the extroverts, to talk about 2 to 3 strengths that they have, what makes them special, what are some advantages when working with an extrovert. And then I would have also asked them to list 2 or 3 weaknesses. What makes extroverts sometimes hard to work with? I would have done the exact same thing for the introvert side. So those on the left side of the team or left side of the room, think about 2 to 3 introvert strengths, what makes you special, advantages when working with an introvert, and also list 2 to 3 weaknesses, what makes introverts sometimes hard to work with. Now, the reason you ask extroverts to think about themselves and introverts to think about themselves is it takes away any risk for people to be too critical of the other person. So you're asking them to really talk about their positive side and be critical of themselves. So that's why this is typically done this way. After asking everyone to talk and list out 2 or 3 strengths and weaknesses, we would have heard from both sides of the room. And perhaps we would have had some differences in answers. So it's likely that we would have heard things like extroverts bring a lot of energy and liveliness, but sometimes they can talk too much. And maybe for introverts, we would have heard things like we tend to be very calculated and we come fully flushed with our thoughts, but sometimes we might not speak up when we need to. So these might have been some of the examples we heard. The main point of this specific activity is to think about extroverts and introverts, and they tend to easily misunderstand one another. This activity can actually help show the benefits and strengths of working with both types of people. Hopefully, you would have seen that each style contributes something valuable to the workplace, just in a different way. Now, I would have done the exact same thing where I had everyone get to the center of the room, and this time I would have asked for the sensors to go to the right side of the room and the intuitives to go to the left side of the room. So everyone would have shuffled and moved to a side of the room, and then we would have began the activity. I would first give a brief overview of a sensor versus intuitive. So sensors tend to focus on facts, raw data. They tend to think literally in terms of what they can readily see. They tend to be very practical and realistic. Intuitives take a broader view, seeing patterns, connections, and about the potential of the world around them. They visualize not only what something is, but what it could be. They tend to be more future focused and embrace the opportunity of change to try something new. They really appreciate innovation and creativity. So again, this is sensors versus intuitives. Then I would have asked individuals on both sides of the room to choose one well-known celebrity and list 10 or more characteristics of the individual. I would have given some time for you to work with people near you, and we would have shared out some of the characteristics. Now, what's expected to happen during this activity is that sensors might list things having to do with the person's body shape, color of hair, ethnicity, personality, so something a little more observable and concrete. Whereas we would have expected the intuitives to list things like the individual's work, their ideologies, values, contribution to society, something a little bit more abstract and future focused. Now, the main point of this specific activity is to demonstrate our preferences for what we're noticing. So, what kind of information can we most naturally attune to in our brains? So, we all have natural preferences for the type of information we work with best. But the great thing is that if intuitives can learn to work with sensors and vice versa, then we're able to bring both sides and perspectives of something together. The third activity focuses on thinkers versus feelers. So again, I would have had everyone go to the middle of the room, and then what I said, thinkers, go to the right side of the room, and feelers, go to the left side of the room. I then would have given a brief introduction of both, and I would have said something like, thinkers are the people in the workplace that are known for being objective and having a cool approach to most situations and decisions. They tend to be logical. They're quite successful in business, especially within a corporate setting, because thinkers tend to be honest, straight shooting people. Feelers, on the other hand, place a priority on empathy and compassion, concerned with personal impact of their decisions, even if that means objectivity or fairness might not always be the most important thing. So from here, I would have introduced the actual activity. So again, thinkers on the right side of the room, feelers on the left side of the room. And I would have read the scenario and asked you to talk about within your teams how you would respond. The scenario is the company is facing layoffs. 2 employees, Robert and Andrew, hold similar positions in the same department. Rather than employing 2 people to do the work, the company will reshuffle some of the tasks and create a new job description for 1 employee. Both employees are highly qualified. Robert is 60 years old and has been with the company for 25 years. His service to the company has been impeccable. However, because he has so much seniority, his salary is very high. Andrew is 32 and was hired last fall. Even in the short time he has been with the company, he has shown great promise, and he is willing to put in long hours to advance his career. Robert has a wife with health problems and an older son he is putting through college. Andrew is also married with 2 small children. Who do you let go? I'm going to take a moment of silence because I actually want you to think for a moment, what would you do? So I'll give you a moment to think about that. Now, there might have been a lot of different opinions on how to handle this. If you tend to be more of a thinker, you might have realized that, okay, well, Robert has been with the company a long time, so his salary is really high. So if we're really concerned about money, it's obvious we should let him go. But then maybe someone who is more of a feeler could say, how could you let him go? He's been so dedicated. He obviously is committed to this company. We can't let him go. Because of his seniority, it would set such a bad example to the rest of the people in the company if we were to let him go. So we can see that whether or not you're arguing for Robert or for Andrew, if you're a thinker or a feeler, you can come from a different perspective of how you would have decided who to keep. Now, the main point of that activity is really focused on both approaches are valid, but listening to each perspective can actually give a well-rounded understanding. So in my example about Robert, and if we let him go, that could set a bad example for other people in the company, and then more people might fear their jobs being taken away from them. Perhaps that's something that a thinker might not have thought about at first, or maybe vice versa. Maybe a feeler thought, oh, that seems too logical to me. So it's important to think that if we ask other people with diverse perspectives, we could get a more well-rounded approach to make the best decision. And the last of the activities is focused on judgers versus perceivers. Again, everyone to the middle of the room, judgers to the right, perceivers to the left. And it would have been really interesting to see how many people go to each side of the room. Judgers tend to be ordered and organized. These are the people who write a daily to-do list. They tend to seek getting the most out of everything they possibly can. They tend to be pretty good at decision making, and they like rules. Perceivers actually relish in freedom and flexibility. So they prefer adaptation, innovation, and change. They actually don't like making a decision right away because they want to be able to absorb all the data until an answer becomes clear. And these are the kind of people that might focus more on the journey rather than the destination. So the activity focused on judgers versus perceivers is another scenario. A distant but generous relative passes away, and you receive a check for $10,000. What do you do with the money? How do you decide? Talk to a partner about this. So again, the judgers would talk to each other, the perceivers would talk to each other, and we would debrief as an entire class. Now, what we predict to happen is that judgers might be more responsible and organized or intentional with what they do with that $10,000. But perhaps a perceiver might be more spontaneous. They might try to gamble or invest that money to make more, whereas a judger might take the more safe route. I think with any of these four activities, there is a main takeaway here. So when we understand personality types, we can better articulate our own talents and strengths. So knowing that you're an extrovert or a judger, for example, allows you to play up the strengths and qualities that these styles offer and can help you make better choices when taking on projects or seeking new positions. While certain positions may seem appealing on the surface, they could be a poor fit for your type. So again, it's important to understand yourself. And then understanding your types help you make savvier career decisions and learn about how to put your best strengths forward. But this whole point of the team building is to understand the types of your teammates, because this can help you communicate more effectively, work together more efficiently, and use everyone's strengths to the best advantage. So the real main takeaway here is we need extroverts, introverts, sensors and intuitives, thinkers and feelers, judgers and perceivers in the workplace. Next week, we will talk about organizational power and politics. The reading for this week is The Relationship of Organizational Politics and Support. Now, this is a quote-unquote traditional article, and this is the extra credit opportunity. I posted an announcement about how you can submit something for extra credit, and please do it on this article. Next week, you also have your individual paper on your VIA character strengths due. Please, please, please follow the rubric that's posted online. If you follow the rubric, you should have no reason not to get 100% on this on this assignment. You do not need to bring a physical copy to class. Go ahead and upload it on Blackboard. And then by next class on Tuesday, I should have some announcements regarding people who might be able to come as guest speakers or as a panel for the end of the semester. So I should have that information by Tuesday. All right, please email me if you have any questions about today's lecture or upcoming projects or assignments. Thank you and enjoy your weekend.